Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Then Al-Hafiz said, Babu Ta'zir, the chapter of Ta'zir. After having spoken about the had punishments, which are the specific or specified punishments, we're going to talk about something far more open-ended and flexible, which is the Ta'zir. Let us define this term first. Ta'zir in the Arabic language means to prevent something. And in the technical terminology, in the books of fiqh, when we talk about the ta'zir, it means to give somebody discipline or to discipline someone. And by disciplining someone, we mean to say that after somebody has done something wrong, it is to ensure that he rectifies his own character and his behavior. So hopefully he will not repeat that same sin or wrong action again. And the ta'zir is carried out by the person who has authority. So it's not just anyone who can carry out a ta'zir on anyone else. So for example, the parent can carry out a ta'zir on his child. So the Prophet ﷺ said in the famous hadith that you order your children to pray at 7 years of age. So this is when they should start getting into the habit of praying. And if they reach 10 years of age and they don't pray, then you can beat them. So this is a ta'zir. This beating then is a ta'zir, because it is disciplining the child to do that which is proper. Ta'zir does not have to be hitting, of course, it could be just a simple telling off. Basically anything which will produce the required etiquettes. What's the ruling on a ta'zir? Some scholars say it is wajib if you have the authority. Other scholars say that it does not have to be wajib, rather it is down to the ijtihad of the imam. If he wants to, he can implement the ta'zir punishment, but he does not have to. And they say that with some people, if you don't punish them, then this could lead to the required outcome. So for example, when it comes to the prisoners of war, it is permissible for the imam just to let them off for free. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, فَإِمَّا مَنًّا بَعْدُ وَإِمَّا فِدَاء. So after the fighting, either you can let them off for free or you can ransom them. And this is the better opinion, that the ta'zir is an open-ended and flexible issue, not like the had punishment, which becomes wajib. So with the ta'zir, if the imam thinks that it is better to give the ta'zir, he will do so. If not, he won't. But what are the types of sin for which a ta'zir is given? It is given for all types of disobedience to the sharia. So this does not have to mean committing a particular sin. It could also be given for not doing something which is wajib. For example, the hadith which we mentioned, where the Prophet ﷺ ordered that you order your children to pray at 7, and at 10 if they're not praying, then you're allowed to hit them. So this is a ta'zir for something which they are not doing. It is not a ta'zir for some sin which they have committed, meaning to say actively committing a sin. Likewise with the ta'zir punishment of leaving the Salat al-Jama'ah if you live close enough to come to the masjid. And we mentioned the hadith before, where the Prophet ﷺ said, لَقَدْ هَمَمْتُ أَنْ آمُرَ بِالصَّلَاةِ فَتُقَامُ ثُمَّ آمُرَ رَجُلًا فَيَؤُمُّ النَّاسِ. That I was thinking strongly of ordering that the Salat al-Jama'ah be established and a man to lead the people. ثُمَّ أَنْطَلِقُ بِرِجَالٍ مَعَهُمْ حُزَمٌ مِنْ حَطَبٍ إِلَى قَوْمٍ لَا يَشْهَدُونَ الصَّلَاةَ فَأُحْرِقُ عَلَيْهِمْ بُيُوتَهُمْ بِالنَّارِ. And after that I should go out with some men carrying firewood and burn down the houses of those people who are not attending the Salat al-Jama'ah. So you can see an incredibly severe threat. So in other words, the one who does not attend the Salat al-Jama'ah whilst he lives close enough, then he is also entitled to a ta'zir. So a ta'zir can be given to somebody who actively commits a sin or somebody who leaves off that which is wajib. But notice the difference, that when it comes to actively committing a sin, then that ta'zir can be given every time he commits that sin. But leaving off a wajib action, like not praying or not attending the Salat al-Jama'ah, then that could be repeatedly given until he performs the wajib action. So we say that the ta'zir is given for a disobedience to the sharia, whether it be actively committing a sin or not doing that which is wajib, for which there is no had punishment nor a kaffara prescribed. So this is an important condition, because if we have a particular sin for which there is a kaffara or for which there is a had punishment, then we do not give a ta'zir, because we do not punish somebody twice for the same sin. So for example, somebody has intercourse with his wife during the daytime of Ramadan. This is a sin, but it does not incur a ta'zir. Why? Because it already has a kafara, which is to free a servant. If not, then fast 2 consecutive lunar months. If not, then feed 60 poor people. And it is also not given for those sinful actions for which there is a qisas involved. So for example, if somebody cuts off another person's arm, and the victim can take qisas and cut off the perpetrator's arm, then after that matter has been settled, we do not give the perpetrator any extra punishment or ta'zir. What is the evidence for the ta'zir punishment, that it is part of the sharia? Well, firstly, we can justify it in a general sense. We can say that the sharia brings about the benefits and wards off the harm. This is the basic aim and objective of the sharia, to bring about benefit in this world and in the hereafter, and to ward off the harms both in this world and in the hereafter. And so whatever would bring about these aims and objectives has to be legislated in the sharia, because you cannot attain your objectives unless you find a route to these objectives. But then we also have some specific types of evidence. For example, you being allowed to hit your children for not praying at the age of 10. Also, for example, the one who stole from the war booty, which is ghulul, the Prophet ﷺ ordered that his belongings all be burnt. So this is punishing someone financially. And for example, where we have the situation where 2 people sneezed, one said Alhamdulillah and the other one did not. And the Prophet replied, Ya Rahamukallah, to the one who made tahmeed, but not to the other. And he justified this by saying that he said Alhamdulillah, so he deserves the response, whereas you do not. So this is also a ta'zir, because it is depriving him of goodness. So in future he will say Alhamdulillah. And so this is ta'deeb. It is inculcating in him the correct manners and etiquettes. So what type of sins are we talking about for which we can give the ta'zir punishment? Well, we know we have a had punishment for zina, but what about if a person is just in privacy with a non-mahram woman, or he touches her in a sexual manner, or kisses her, but without the actual penetration? So we don't have a had punishment for this, but a ta'zir can be given. Or for example, in a case of stealing, when the conditions for the cutting off are not met. So the had punishment will not be given, however, he can still be given a ta'zir. So for example, if somebody takes some wealth which belongs to someone else, but it is not kept in a hirz, then this does not incur the cutting off, but we can still give him a ta'zir, because what he did is still wrong. What about if somebody attacks another person and there is no qisas involved in that, because perhaps you cannot give the qisas, but there is only diya or blood money involved due to the injury? In a case like this where there is no qisas involved, only blood money, can we then give the ta'zir? Because the point is, the blood money is the right of the victim, but the fact that the perpetrator attacked another innocent person is also taking away the right of Allah Jalla wa Ala. So to restore the right of Allah Jalla wa Ala, some scholars say that he can be given the ta'zir on top of the blood money which he gives to the victim. The other opinion on this issue is that there is no ta'zir in a case like this, and we would suffice with the blood money. But if there is no qisas nor any diya, then we can definitely say that a ta'zir can be given if somebody infringes upon the rights of the other. What about if somebody destroys somebody else's wealth intentionally? Well, there is no doubt that he stands as a guarantor, so he has to repay the victim. But do we say that's enough, or can we give him a ta'zir punishment? Actually, in this case, we could argue for a ta'zir punishment, because when you destroy somebody else's wealth, you have done 2 things wrong. Firstly, infringing upon the rights of the other person, and so for this you have to pay them back. But secondly, you've also infringed upon the rights of Allah Jalla wa Ala, because what Allah demands from us is peace and security in the society, not mischief making. So if you are making this mischief, then you have to give Allah His due rights, and for this we can dish out the ta'zir. And this would be better in the interest of peace and security in the society. And this is also pertaining to the rights of the other Muslims as well, because they deserve to live in peace and security. What about a female homosexual? We discussed previously that the male homosexual is to be executed, and that this act in the eyes of the Sharia is impermissible. But what about female homosexuals? Well, this is not actually zina because penetration doesn't take place, as clearly this is impossible. So it is not exactly like male homosexuality, and so therefore there is no had punishment for this action as such, but still it is sexual deviancy, and hence it incurs a ta'zir, whatever the Imam feels is appropriate. Or what about just abusing somebody else, like name calling or making other defamatory statements, but not qadhaf, because qadhaf is accusing somebody of zina. So we're not talking about qadhaf here, we're talking about other defamatory remarks. Well, there's no had punishment for that. However, you can still give a ta'zir. For example, somebody might accuse another Muslim of gambling or making girlfriends, not of zina, but of making girlfriends or being alone in privacy with non-mahram women, or just any action which would defame a Muslim and would violate his honor. So if he makes these accusations without any evidence, then a ta'zir can certainly be given to him. If the matter gets taken to court, where someone is making a defamatory remark against another, but the victim forgives the perpetrator, could we still carry out a ta'zir on the perpetrator? You could argue, yes, you can, because even though the victim has forgiven the perpetrator, but these types of people making defamatory remarks are causing mischief on the earth, and so they need to be rectified. So you could argue that even if the victim forgives, we still give him a ta'zir punishment. So this is all about whether these defamatory remarks, is it the right of Allah or is it the right of the victim? We spoke about the same scenario in the chapter of qadhaf. But with these defamatory remarks, if you are going to lash them, then it is not allowed to be more than the 80 lashes, because the ta'zir is generally not as severe as the had punishment if the sin is of the same type. So here, the sin is of the same type because it is making a defamatory remark against someone else. And this is what qadhaf is about as well. In the hadith which is coming up, the Prophet ﷺ said that more than 10 lashes should not be given except for a had from the hudud of Allah Jalla wa Ala. And so because of this, some ulama have said that when you're giving a ta'zir punishment, you're not allowed to whip the perpetrator more than 10 lashes. But what the hadith means when it talks about the had is not the official had punishment, but rather it is any sin or transgression in the sharia. So in other words, what this hadith is talking about is when a person, let's say a father or a parent or a teacher, disciplines his child or pupil, or perhaps a husband disciplining his wife, he's not allowed to hit them more than 10 stripes. Because if we just restrict it to 10 lashes, then this simply does not make sense. What if a person commits an incredibly serious sin, which does not have a had punishment, and we're only going to give him 10 lashes? Let's say this person takes drugs which do not cause intoxication, but nevertheless they are drugs, which are of course harmful, and many other serious sins, and after all of that we're just going to lash him 10 times. This is not a punishment which fits the crime, and in the Sharia, the punishment fits the crime. What about shaving off the beard? Is this something for which a ta'zir can be given? The answer is yes. Imitating women is not a minor sin, it is a major sin. But there is no had punishment prescribed for this, therefore the Imam will choose an appropriate punishment. What about if somebody masturbates with his hand, let's say, without there being a need to do so? Then this is also something for which a ta'zir can be given, in accordance with what the Imam feels is appropriate. As for masturbation itself, then the correct view and the original principle on this issue is that it is not permissible. However, it can be permissible due to a genuine need. For example, if a person fears that he's going to fall into zina and will not be able to control himself. So better than that, if he was to make himself ejaculate, and this will make him avoid zina, then this would be better for him to do so. Because with some people, you just don't know. They simply cannot control themselves. And the issue is quite serious with them. But still, committing zina cannot be made halal. Therefore, in this case of genuine and extreme need, we would have to allow masturbation. Or you could have a medical reason. For example, if the semen does not come out of his body, maybe this will harm him. If some doctors say so, then in this case we would allow him to extract this semen from his body. So if he does it for these types of needs, a shar'i need or a badani need, which is a bodily need, then there would be no ta'zir on this person. Otherwise, the principle is that there would be a ta'zir. The Prophet ﷺ said to the young men he was speaking to that anyone who cannot find any means to get married, then let him fast. But actually, masturbating would be easier than fasting, but the Prophet did not indicate to this when he was giving the guidance, which would then show that this is not a viable shar'i option, because the Prophet ﷺ would give you the choice which is easiest. So if he deliberately leaves off the easier choice, then it indicates that it is not permissible. Let us take a look at these ahadith. Number 1089, وعن أبي بردة رضي الله عنه أنه سمع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول لا يجلد فوق 10 أسواق إلا في حد من حدود الله تعالى متفق عليه. From Abu Burda al-Ansari that the Prophet said, more than 10 whips should not be given for any sin except for one of the had of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Muttafaqun alayh. Some scholars have taken from this hadith that when it comes to the ta'zir punishment, then you're not allowed to give more than 10 whips. And this is not the correct opinion, because somebody could do something extremely major and 10 stripes simply would not be enough. Rather, what we say is that the word had in this hadith does not refer to the official had punishments. Rather, the word had means, as we said before in the Kitab al-Had, it means a limit. So 10 stripes should not be given except if somebody infringes one of the limits of Allah Jalla wa Ala. So what this hadith is talking about is simply a case of a parent or a teacher disciplining the child or the student. So when it comes to these matters of discipline, then you don't give more than 10 whips or 10 smacks. But when it comes to the violation of the limits of Allah Jalla wa Ala, then more can be given. For example, if the 10-year-old son does not pray, do we restrict ourselves to 10 hits? Well, not necessarily, because not praying is violating one of the hudud of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Hence, more than 10 hits can be given. What this hadith talks about is just in normal everyday circumstances where you would want to discipline the child, or somebody under your authority like a servant, or a student, or a wife. So for example, a man who enjoys a relationship with a woman, he kisses her, touches her, and does everything possible except the penetration. Well, he's not liable for the had punishment, but are we only going to just give him 10 stripes? Surely here the punishment does not fit the crime, and this is completely against the spirit of the Sharia. And even in the Quran, the word had does mean a limit of Allah Jalla wa Ala. For example, Allah saying, وَمَنْ يَتَعَدَّ حُدُودَ اللَّهِ فَقَدْ ظَلَمَ نَفْسَهُ. And whoever transgresses the limits of Allah, then he has oppressed his own self. Also he says, تِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ فَلَا تَقْرَبُوهَا. And these are the limits of Allah, so do not even approach them. Meaning don't even approach violating the rights of Allah Jalla wa Ala against you. Also, when you're hitting somebody with a ta'zir, let's say a child or a wife, then we know it is a condition that it needs to be such that it is not a violent hitting, or something which does not leave a bruise, or a broken bone, or bleeding, or the like. Remember, when you are disciplining your family, the aim needs to be to instill the fear of Allah Jalla wa Ala in them. But if you senselessly beat them up, then they will not fear Allah, they will fear you. And this is not the correct way to do things, because fearing you is not virtuous, fearing Allah is virtuous. And also we need to notice the condition that you do not strike them on the face, and we discussed that issue before. But hitting should not be the first port of call. Rather, the first port of call should simply be informing them and teaching them, educating them. If this is done with the correct technique, then normally this will be the only thing which you'll ever need to rectify your family, if you teach them and educate them in the proper way. And how to teach and educate is a whole topic in and of itself. But sometimes you are left with no choice but to hit them. And so if it does come down to this, then even then there are limits and regulations which we have mentioned. However, if we say that the ta'zir can be more than 10 whips, then the question is, can it become as much as the had punishment? Well, in this we say that if the sin for which there is a ta'zir punishment is of the same type as the sin for which there is a had punishment, then the ta'zir has to be lower than the had. For example, with zina it is 100 lashes. Now if somebody enjoys himself with a non-mahram woman but does not actually penetrate her so as to commit zina, so as to incur the had punishment, then for somebody like him we would give a ta'zir, but it would not reach 100 lashes. It must be lower. Whereas the ta'zir for somebody making mischief much in the land, for example dealing with drugs and so on, his ta'zir could possibly be the death sentence. And that's clearly more than 100 lashes, and the reason why it's more than the had is because the two sins are not of the same type. As for rape, for example, then this is of the same type as zina, however it is far worse than zina, clearly, because zina is done by mutual consent, rape is not. Therefore the punishment of rape can be higher than the 100 lashes. In fact, it could be anything up to the death sentence, because the rapist could be seen as somebody causing mischief in the land, and these types of people are better off dead than alive. The ta'zir punishment could simply be a rebuke, or saying something to dishonor him. For example, somebody does something wrong and the hakim tells him, you are a zalim, you are an oppressor. Or he might say, ya mu'tadi, that you are a transgressor. So all of these words would definitely harm the reputation of a man, so this could serve as a ta'zir. Or for example, he could have a financial penalty, and this is permissible in the Sharia. We know the Prophet ﷺ gave a ta'zir which was financial in nature. For example, burning the belongings of the man who was guilty of ghulul, stealing from the war booty. The ta'zir could even be given to somebody who does not do something which is mustahab. For example, in the case where two people who sneezed and one said alhamdulillah, the other one didn't, and this is mustahab, and the Prophet replied to the one who said alhamdulillah, and he did not reply to the one who did not make the tahmeed. And this is how the Prophet justified it, that he made the tahmeed, you didn't, I replied to him, I don't reply to you. So in other words, the one who did not make the tahmeed, he was deprived of the Prophet's dua. And this is also a form of ta'zir, because it instills discipline into the other person. And that's the whole point of a ta'zir, remember, it is to instill discipline. Hadith 1090 وعن عائشة رضي الله عنها أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال أقيلوا ذوي الهيئات عثراتهم إلا الحدود رواه أحمد وأبو داود والنسائي والبيهقي. From Aisha, the Prophet said, when people of high status in society make a mistake or a sin, then forgive them or overlook their sins, except if they commit a sin which incurs the had punishment of Allah Jalla wa Ala. The hadith is sahih. The Prophet ﷺ here is talking about people of sharaf or nobility and a high status in society, so they could be chiefs of tribes, for example. So basically people whom others look up to as their leaders or as their guides. The Prophet ﷺ is saying that with these people be extra lenient, so if they make mistakes then let them off, and don't be so ready to punish them. The words dhawil hayat can also mean people who are normally of sound character and deen. So if they make a mistake, then don't be so ready to punish them, because it's not like committing a sin is part of their nature, and everybody can fall short at times. So upon this latter translation then, this would make sense because these people do not normally commit sins, and if they do, then it is better to let them off because it's no big deal. It's not like they're going to continue committing these sins and cause others to do so and generally create sin in society. So these people are not like that, therefore let them go and be lenient. If we take the other meaning, that these are people of nobility or high status in society, then one might ask, how is it that we are letting them off, but for the same sin we may not let somebody of a lower status off? Well, the answer to that is, as we said before, the aim of the Sharia is to bring about benefit and ward off harm. Anything whose benefit is greater than its harm, then it is either permissible or ordered in the Sharia. If the harms and benefits are the same, or the harms are greater than the benefit, then this particular action is impermissible. Well, if that is borne in mind, then you will realize that if you were to take to account people who are chiefs in societies or who are looked up to by others, if you were to take them to account and punish them, then because these people have followers, this could lead to a fitna. So their followers could perhaps rebel, or they could feel some grudge or enmity in their hearts against the Muslim ruler. And this can clearly lead to fighting, insults, and general fitna. Therefore, punishing these people of high society could actually lead to a greater harm than the good which it could produce. So the Sharia is bearing this point in mind. However, even with this rule, we say that this needs to be on the condition that we feel that if we were to punish these people, it would lead to a greater harm than it would good. If we feel that it would lead to a greater good than it would lead to a harm, then there's no problem in punishing even these types of people of higher society and high status. As for the official had punishment, which we have named, and there are only a limited number of them, then nobody escapes from this. As long as the sin is established, then the had punishment must be carried out. So there is no leeway when it comes to the had punishment. The situation is clearly more serious. And we know in the narration beforehand, the woman from Al-Makhzum, she was of a high status, people looked up to her, and she was found guilty of stealing. She would ask people to lend them some wealth, and then she would deny that they ever gave this wealth to her. And we discussed the narration before, the Prophet ﷺ ordered that her hand be cut off. And this is despite the fact that people tried to intercede on her behalf. They sent Osama ibn Zayd to intercede, and the Prophet became angry. So with the had punishment, nobody gets away with it. But as for things which are less than the had punishment, then when it comes to the people who have some status and nobility in society, we have to weigh out the pros and cons. And so this is the end result or the end game of the Sharia, to bring about more benefit than harm. Of course, no society, no matter how Islamic it may be, can never remove the harm 100%. That's simply impossible. The only place in which the harm could be removed 100% is Jannah. But people there would be of a different nature entirely. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَنَزَعْنَا مَا فِي صُدُورِهِم مِّنْ غِلٍّ إِخْوَانًا عَلَى سُرُرٍ مُتَقَابِلِينَ. And we shall extract or remove from their breast any hatred or grudge, and they will be brothers sitting on couches facing each other. So the state of the people in Jannah, even though they will be still human in flesh and bone and so on, but their state of the heart will be different. So there will be no evil of this type, neither in physical action nor in speech. It should be noted that the hadith itself is weak. Nevertheless, it would be wise to act upon its teaching, just as a political measure. Hadith number 1091. وعن علي رضي الله عنه قال: ما كنت لأقيم على أحد حدا فيموت فأجد في نفسي إلا شارب الخمر فإنه لو مات وديته. أخرجه البخاري. It's the statement of Ali radiallahu anhu. He says that if I was to dish out the had punishment on anyone and he was to die, then I would not feel as though I owe anyone anything except for the one who drinks the intoxicant, because if by whipping him he was to die, I would pay his blood money. We take from this that firstly the Imam, when giving the had punishment, he must make sure that the had does not lead to the death. So you do not strike him in any place which could cause some irreversible injury, like the head for example, or it could cause death. Likewise, you do not give the had punishment to somebody who is so weak he will not be able to take it. Otherwise, you could use the hila, similar to that which the Prophet ﷺ used, with the 100 twigs in the branch, beating the weak man who committed zina. However, if in carrying out the had punishment, the one carrying it out did everything correct, so he did not strike in any place which could cause death, and basically he himself did everything correct, and he did not overstep the limit, and despite that, if it leads to death, then nobody is a guarantor, because this death came as a result of something which is permitted, and when something results from that which is permitted in the Sharia, then nobody stands as a guarantor. If it be the case that he gives the had punishment, but the ruling was wrong, so this person receiving the had was not guilty, and because of this had punishment he dies, then in this case the blood money will be due, because a mistake was made, and this was not permitted by the Sharia. However, does the Imam pay the blood money from his own personal wealth or from the Baytul Mal? The answer is it's from the Baytul Mal, because the had punishments serve the community. In other words, it's for the benefit of the Muslim community. But the point is that in a normal case of a had punishment, as long as the person is guilty and he was whipped the specified number of times, and not in places which could cause death, and nothing wrong was done, so no limits were overstepped, then in this case, if death results from this punishment, then there is no kafara, no diya, and no qisas. However, this is different to the ta'zir, because the ta'zir is open-ended and it is down to the ijtihad of the Imam. So with the ta'zir, if death is resulted, then the Imam would have to pay the blood money, because this punishment was not something which was stipulated by the Sharia in the text. So that is a difference. If that's the case, then this narration would strongly suggest to us that the punishment of the one who drinks the khamr, the sharib, is not a had punishment, rather it is a ta'zir. And this appears to be the stronger opinion in light of the evidence. So after these ahadith, the following narrations which are coming up are pertaining to the one who attacks another innocent person, for example on a street, wanting his money or wanting to kill him. The general principle here is that if you are attacked, or for example somebody wants your wealth, or somebody wants to harm your family, so generally if you, your wealth or your family are under attack, then you are allowed to repel the attacker off using the least force necessary, or the least violent means necessary. It could be that you could talk him out of it. So you use the least and then the next after that. And if it means you killing him, then this would be permissible in the Sharia. Hadith number 1092. وعن سعيد بن زيد رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من قتل دون ماله فهو شهيد رواه الأربعة وصححه الترمذي. From Sa'id ibn Zayd, the Prophet said, whoever is killed protecting his wealth, then he is a shaheed. The hadith is sahih. So we say that the rule is that you defend yourself using the least force necessary, and you increase as required. Are you allowed to kill your assailant as your first port of call? The answer is generally no, unless you think or you strongly suspect that he is about to kill you. For example, if he's brandishing a gun and you feel that he is a little unstable and at any time now he's going to pull the trigger on you, then if you strongly feel this is the case, then yes, you can absolutely take preemptive action and kill him. And you have every right not to wait around to find out if he does actually pull the trigger or not. So the one who dies defending his wealth, he is a shaheed. In the language of the Arab, shaheed means a witness. And technically when we talk about a shaheed, we mean a person who is killed fighting in the way of Allah, meaning fighting to make the word of Allah the highest, and he is killed by a kafir in the battle, or as a direct result of the battle. However, this type of shahada does not apply in this hadith here, because here the man is killed protecting his wealth. He's not killed trying to make the word of Allah the highest. And so we have two types of shuhada, the one who is shaheed in this world and in the hereafter, and that applies to the one who is killed fighting to make the word of Allah the highest. And we have another type of shaheed who is just shaheed in the hereafter but not in this life. And there are many types here. This is one of them. The one who dies from a belly problem is another. The one who dies from a plague. The one who dies drowning. The one who dies with a roof collapsing on his head. The woman who dies in the postnatal bleeding. So all of these are examples of shuhada, but shuhada in the hereafter, not in this world. So all the rulings apply to them in terms of washing them, shrouding them, and praying the Salat al-Janazah over them. And the difference between the two categories is clear enough. The one who gets killed fighting in the way of Allah, then he himself voluntarily undertakes the risk. Whereas the other types of shuhada, they do not voluntarily undertake the risk of dying. They just happen to die because that was the qadr of Allah Jalla wa Ala, that they should die in that way. They did not voluntarily put their life on the line. Is it obligatory to defend your wealth? The answer is no, because it is permissible for you to give away your wealth as a gift. So if that's permissible, then if you feel that defending your wealth will put your life at risk and you will not be able to defend yourself, then you don't have to defend your wealth. You can simply give your wealth to the attacker and spare yourself that way. However, the same thing cannot be said about the life or your family members, because if somebody comes to take your life, then it is obligatory upon you to defend yourself. Or if somebody comes to violate your family, then again it is obligatory to defend them, because they cannot be given away as a gift. You cannot say to somebody, here, take my wife as a gift and do with her what you want, but you can do that with your wealth. So because there is a clear difference there, you don't have to defend your wealth, but you absolutely have to defend your wife or other family members, because that is your honor at stake. And we say the same thing about your own life as well. So when it comes to life and honor, then that must be defended by way of obligation. But when it comes to your wealth, then it is better if you can defend it. Otherwise, if you feel you will not be able to defend it, then you don't have to. Hadith number 1093. وعن عبد الله بن خباب رضي الله عنه قال: سمعت أبي يقول: سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول: تكون فتنة فكن فيها عبد الله المقتولة ولا تكن القاتلة. أخرجه ابن أبي خيثمة والدارقطني وأخرج أحمد ونحوه عن خالد بن عرفطة. From Abdullah ibn Khabbab, he says, I heard my father say that the Prophet said, there would be times of fitna or tribulation. Then, O slave of Allah, in those times you must be the one who is killed and do not be the one who is the killer. The hadith is Hasan. Previously we said that if somebody attacks you, then you must defend yourself. And so when your life is at stake here, you must defend your life. This hadith seems to be making an exception. It seems to be telling us that during times of fitna, you would rather be killed than defend yourself and be the killer. The fitna spoken of in this hadith is the fitna where Muslim groups are fighting each other, and each Muslim group thinks that they are upon the truth. The fitna here does not pertain to when certain Muslims make takfir or tadlil on other Muslims. So they say, oh, this Muslim is a deviant, or he is misguided, or he is a mubtadi', a person who follows or practices bid'ah. It is not that type of fitna which is mainly pertaining to the tongue. Rather, we're talking about physical fighting and even killing. And also we have an example from Uthman ibn Affan during times of fitna when he was the Khalifa. He told the people, do not defend me, because in doing so this could lead to a greater fitna. And so essentially Uthman ibn Affan sacrificed his own self in order to protect the blood of the Muslims in the community. We know that Uthman ibn Affan was killed during these times of fitna. And we know the Prophet ﷺ described Uthman ibn Affan as a shaheed when he was on Mount Uhud and the mountain started to shake, and he told Mount Uhud to keep still, O Uhud, because on you there is a Prophet and a Siddiq and 2 Shuhada. So the Siddiq, the truthful one, that was Abu Bakr, and the 2 Shuhada he's speaking of, these were Umar and Uthman radiallahu anhum. However, we can adopt a middle ground here. We can say that even during times of fitna, you have to look at the benefits and harms. If defending your own self and killing your assailant would not lead to a greater fitna, then you can do this and defend yourself, even if you have to kill the assailant. If it will lead to a greater fitna, then you do not defend yourself and you take the death, just as instructed in this hadith. So the point is that we are still following the ultimate goal of the Sharia, which is to bring about a greater benefit than harm. What is obligatory upon the Muslim Ummah is to be united under one Imam. Even if that Imam is a sinful person or an oppressor, it is better for them to be united under that Imam than to have no ruler. So a bad ruler is still better than no ruler. And the Prophet ﷺ said, مَنْ أَتَاكُمْ وَأَمْرُكُمْ جَمِيعٌ عَلَى رَجُلٍ وَاحِدٍ يُرِيدُ أَنْ يَشُقَّ عَصَاكُمْ أَوْ يُفَرِّقَ جَمَاعَتَكُمْ فَاقْتُلُوهُ. Whoever comes to you whilst you are all united under one man, and he wants to split your stick, meaning sow discord between you, or to split you up into groups, then you have to kill him. The ruler, however much you dislike him, must be listened to and obeyed. In all that which is not a sin against Allah Jalla wa Ala, the Prophet ﷺ said, اسمعوا وأطيعوا وإن استعمل عليكم عبد حبشي كأن رأسه زبيبة. You must listen and obey even if an Abyssinian servant becomes your ruler and he has a small head like a raisin. So even if he is of this type of status, and an Abyssinian servant was obviously looked down upon in society during those days. So even this type of ruler then, you have to listen and you have to obey. Because being united under a ruler you dislike is better than being not united. Likewise, the Prophet ﷺ in the Sahih saying, إِنَّكُمْ سَتَرَوْنَ بَعْدِي أَثْرَةً وَأُمُورًا تُنْكِرُونَهَا قالوا فما تأمرنا يا رسول الله قال أدوا إليهم حقهم وصلوا الله حقكم. He said, you will see after me rulers who will take your wealth for themselves, and you will see other matters which you will condemn. And so they asked, what do you order us to do during these times, O Messenger of Allah? And he replied, give them their rights, meaning give the rulers their due rights, which is to obviously hear and obey, and ask Allah for your rights. So this is how the Muslims behave towards the ruler. As for if you take matters into your own hand and start to rebel against the ruler in riots and demonstrations and wars and guerrilla warfare, then this leads to a greater fitna than you were already in, which completely opposes the spirit of the Sharia. Remember what we said, the Sharia seeks to bring about benefit and ward off the harm. So those people who rise up against the ruler, then as long as the ruler is Muslim, they are doing wrong in rising up against him. And these people who are rising up against the ruler are normally those who are calling to tribalism or some sort of nationalism or some sort of call of jahiliyyah. The Prophet ﷺ said, من قتل تحت راية عمية يدعو لعصبية أو ينصر لعصبية فقتلة جاهلية. Whoever is killed under a blind flag, meaning a flag of misguidance, as opposed to the flag of the Deen of Islam, and this person is calling to tribalism or supporting the tribalism, then if he is killed, then this is a Jahiliyyah killing. So in other words, he suffers the death of the Jahiliyyah. So rising up against the Muslim ruler, then this is from the Asabiyyah. You're supporting your own little cause of your own group, and you are following your desires. You're not following the text of the Sharia, which tells you to listen and obey as long as the ruler is a Muslim, however evil he may be. Okay, let's take some review questions. So question number 1. Explain what we mean by ta'zir linguistically and in the technical sense, and give an example of when it is administered for doing something haram and another example for leaving off something obligatory. Question number 2. Is it obligatory to defend your wealth and your family when under attack? Give the detail to this scenario. Question number 3. We learnt from the previous hadith that when it comes to bloodshed fitna, then you are to be the killed and not the killer. Is this always the case? Give the detail.